This one is on the influence of the founders. You're responsible for knowing how the Constitution came about and how the founders, the people that wrote it, were influenced. All right, so if we look at early on in the history of the United States with the colonists, there is a precedent set for representative democracy or government, in which, if we look at Virginia, the first colony, they set up a representative assembly at Jamestown. Yes, England had given a contract out and set up some leadership, but once they got off the boat, they set up their own leadership and ways to vote for their leaders and things like that. And then if you look at the Mayflower Compact, they came on their own, wanted to set up a city on the hill, and once they got over there, they're on the boat, they're like, wait, before we get off, we need to make sure we have a written set of rules and laws that we all agree to. And the important thing there is that we all agree to, that it's coming from popular sovereignty, that the people rule, and they're kind of setting up a social contract kind of thing. So after that, you see the rest of the colonies doing similar things and setting up assemblies and representative democracies. So it's just, the main idea is that government in the states, what would become the states, had already had a precedent of being, of that foundational principle of popular sovereignty and representation in either form of government. And then we move on to the Declaration of Independence, and it is clear evidence that the founders were influenced by Locke, one of the Enlightenment thinkers from Europe. And you can see in Jefferson's writing, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that nations are instituted among men, that there are certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and he said the pursuit of happiness, that whenever governments are not protecting those rights, that we can overthrow them. Like, that's the basic premise of the Declaration of Independence. Those are ideas straight from Locke's writings. Locke wrote about certain natural rights, like life, liberty, and property, and Jefferson just changed property to pursuit of happiness, but used those same lists. He wrote about establishing government through a social contract, that people give up some of their freedoms in order to live in security and in a controlled environment. We follow rules to be secure. The colonists had already been doing that up until this point. And then the purpose of government is to protect rights, and if it doesn't, they can change it or overthrow it. They being the people, not the government. The people that give government its authority can change it or overthrow it. So we're picking up an influence from Enlightenment thinkers. We're also picking up the influence from just colonial history, that democracy and popular sovereignty and rights were already inbred or important to the colonists, and then later on the states. And then here, the Articles of Confederation show the influence of a strong central government that the colonists lived under, and their fear of that strong central government. They feared a powerful government, and so they wrote the Articles of Confederation. Each state was basically a sovereign nation, and they said, okay, we'll agree to be friends or be together so that we can make sure we protect ourselves from France and England and Spain, but we're still our own sovereign country. So the states or regional governments retain ultimate authority. And that just shows their influence of their experiences with Great Britain and feeling like they didn't have any freedoms under that strong national government. So you are responsible for knowing some of the weaknesses of the articles and why they didn't work. And the main reason was Congress was not allowed to demand revenue from states. They couldn't tax the states or the people in the states. They could ask, they could beg, but the states could say no. So that meant that the federal government did not have any money. If you can't levy taxes, you don't have money. And the one thing that they needed money for was the army, and the Confederate Army. And so eventually the army just had to disband because it couldn't pay them. Then we have any actions of Congress required 9 of 13 states to approve, meaning you needed a 2/3 vote or approval rate to get something done. And it basically meant that nothing was done. There were some bills passed about the Western lands, but other than that, they couldn't agree to pass much of anything, which was the intention of the people who wrote the articles, because they didn't want the federal government to be able to do much of anything anyhow. And then one other important idea is that there was no national courts. Any disputes between the states, within the states, was left unsolved. If you felt like a state was being unfair to you or a judge was being unfair to you, like the Farmers and Shays Rebellion, there was no other course of action. They rebelled, and that's a huge sign of the unrest in the country at the time, that you can't have this loose government with no power. So again, the main idea is that the articles were basically just a league of friendship, and there was no national government really intended at all. Again, because they feared a national government. All right. Any more of those? Keep working. All right. So the delegates of Constitutional Convention, these are the guys that wrote the Constitution, and if we're talking about things that influenced the founders, where they came from, who they were, would definitely be an influence. So if we just look over here on the side, there were 55 men total. 33 were lawyers, 3 were doctors, 50% had college degrees, 4 were former governors of the states, 6 were plantation owners, 8 were businessmen. The average age for the delegates of the Constitution was 42. Madison was 36. Hamilton was 32. Benjamin Franklin was the one outlier. He was 81, which was very old. He even had to be carried into the meetings. But most importantly, most of those 55 men, the majority of them, were nationalists, meaning they wanted a strong central government. They had decided or determined from the experiences with the Articles that a strong central government was what was needed to have a government that would protect them and make them secure. Madison is known as the writer, the author of the Constitution. Not that he was the only one with the ideas, because there were 55, but he's the one that took the notes and wrote it. He spent months before going to this convention reviewing European political theory, Montesquieu, Locke, and that idea of separation of powers from Montesquieu, he relied heavily on. And the 3 branches, the checks and balances that you find in the Constitution are because of those things that Montesquieu wrote and that Madison read. Madison was also highly influenced by Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson. He was not there, but he was in France, and he was kind of mentoring Madison. So a lot of Madison is really highly influenced by Jefferson as well. So all that to say is that you could see the kinds of people that were there, and that they were highly influenced by the European political thinkers.